What skills have you developed or improved because of D&D?
What have we gotten better at because of our experience as a dungeon master?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think there's an easy answer for me. It's accents. I think I talked about it last episode, but I am obsessed with accents, and I think that stems a lot from Dungeons and Dragons, because the NPCs, I want them to have flavor, I want them to have life, and so because of that, I give them unique and sometimes silly and ridiculous accents, to the point where I think I've gotten pretty decent at accents. I still can't do like a New Zealander accent or a South African accent, but I can do enough of some silly accents like Russian or English, or Irish. For me, definitely, it's my ability to do kind of party trick accents.
For me, it's the ability to be the center of attention without getting stage fright or being overwhelmed or intimidated.
Huh.
There was, I don't know what happened, but around the age of 16 or 17, all of a sudden I got very uncomfortable around my family. Probably a lot of people can relate to this, but I have a big family, and occasionally you talk, and all of a sudden you have a lot of people looking at you. It's like stage fright. And D&D helped me get over that, because obviously in D&D, people are looking at you to talk all the time. And additionally, I guess the bonus for my things that I've learned is just the ability to improvise really, really, really fast. Like a lot of information. The first few times I ran D&D, I felt like my brain was a Christmas tree because it was just completely lit up.
Yeah. No, seriously, like when you're in the zone, like I feel like Dungeon Mastery is something that really puts you in the zone creatively, where just every bit of your brain is working overtime to play certain characters and manage the plot and keep the players on board and focused. Like, absolutely.
I was thinking about this. There could probably be some kind of research paper about all of the disciplines required to be a DM. For instance, math, social interaction, storytelling, consistency, right? Like accents, whatever. It's a full meal for your brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. And improvisation on top of that just makes everything light up even more. What about you, David?
Oh, what skills have I learned? I think having fun is probably the biggest skill that I've learned.
Wait, what?
Having fun.
So
before D&D, I lived a miserable existence where I had not an ounce of fun. But then I discovered Dungeons and Dragons.
And now my life is all fun. No, but let me explain. So I think before D&D, I would treat things very competitively, and when you start to play D&D, it takes the fun away when you focus entirely on just like competition and just winning. And when you focus more on the story and doing what's interesting, not necessarily what's the best move per se, it makes the game so much more fun, and you can just kind of relax and have a good time and not necessarily
Absolutely
have to kill everything in your path. Sometimes you play a character who's kind of wimpy and they just run away, and that's totally okay. And that makes it more interesting.
I think that's a really good insight, because for the listeners who don't personally know David, he's really good at games, board games, video games, whatever. Like, he will win. And so that's an interesting observation on the shift in your mindset from going from competition and winning to kind of putting the needs of fun and of the table and of the game first. Welcome to Vox Arcana. I'm William.
I'm Jake.
And I'm David.
And this is a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, episode 6, Group Dynamics. And be warned to our gentle listener, this might be a little more serious in tone than our normal episodes. If we're talking about group building and dynamics, let's talk about the importance of getting the right people in your game. Jake, how did you build your group?
This question's tough for me because I've always been like a huge extrovert. And so I've always had, a big circle of friends and even a bigger group of acquaintances to kind of choose from in regards to playing board games with, or eventually playing tabletop RPGs with. So I don't know. This one's hard for me about building a group because I've always kind of had a group ready at all times. So it is about choosing the right people, but I think I was kind of lucky in my high school and college experience because I always had a big group to choose from. And a lot of people do not have a big group to choose from, especially if you live in a small town, or you have a small group of friends. Like it's like, yeah, I mean, these are my friends. This is my group of friends that I'd be willing to play a board game with or go to the other person's house. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss to this. Like, this is something that I know is super important, but I'm trying to think. I don't know if I really have anything to add. I don't know.
This is an interesting problem, Jake, because you are a huge extrovert.
Yeah.
And then David and I would say, are more introvert with extroverted tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
For our listeners, I'm curious to know how many of them are introverts, extroverts, or whatever. Please talk to us. Email us at voxarcanapodcast@gmail.com and let us know your personality type and the personality types of your players, because I actually don't know. I feel like D&D attracts a more introverted group of people, but obviously that's not true because of who we are.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to hear. Again, yeah, you can reach out to us at Twitter or Facebook, at Vox Arcana Podcast or Vox Arcana Pod, and let us know, because yeah, that is a really interesting dynamic of how extroverts approach the game compared to how introverts approach the game, and how a game would be different if it was an extroverted dungeon master versus an introverted dungeon master. But yeah, all of that makes an interesting stew and blended together for your specific group and group building.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of is going to break down what we plan to talk about, I think, a little bit, because I was planning on sort of giving advice on how to do it, but I think really we should approach this from just telling how we have done it, because I don't think there's any right way to do it. All we know is our own experiences.
True.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Where
to
do
me.
we begin?
Well, I mean, I'll go first. For me, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, just role playing in general, by a friend going to a church summer camp, and just fell in love with it. And so I was just really itching to play with whoever I could. At that point, there were no wrong answers in terms of playing with people. So I think for people that really, really want to get into the game, there's no wrong way to play D&D, and there's no wrong answers in terms of what a group looks like, because you just want to play.
I disagree so much.
Wait, really? Okay.
There's definitely a wrong group, and yeah, okay, all right. Unlike Jake has had a pretty consistent group once he went to college in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, and I've actually played with them for one game for your bachelor party, they're just mostly actors and improvers, and it's just terrific, because they're not roles lawyers, they're not system nerds, whatever. They're just like regular people who happen to be playing D&D. And for my group, I almost never have the same group. The most consistent player is David, and even then I had one campaign that did not have David, which was kind of an experiment to see like how groups go without that consistency. So all my players are extroverts, first-time D&D players, usually very young, like high school students, with no background at all in video games or tabletop.
Wait, what? You're playing with teenagers that haven't played video games? Or did you get in a time capsule and pick them out in the 1970s? Like, what?
So this might... I know there's going to be some of my players listening to this, so I have to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to be too proud, like a proud dad. But the people that I love playing with the most are, like, academically gifted, involved in all kinds of activities in church. Like, they're just dynamic, interesting people. And they bring a lot to the table. Oddly enough, my least ideal person is like myself.
Like a hardcore gamer that's got so much, inspiration from video games? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Like, I have seen every nerdy movie, and I've played every video game, and I read system rule books for fun. Much to the chagrin of my wife, who's like wishing that I'm reading anything else at bed, right? What about you, David? How do your groups come together?
Usually it's when I have a campaign idea and I just kind of wait till I have a group of people who I think can be consistent and active. So it's more of just waiting for the right players. So sometimes I'll go long periods of time with not playing because I don't think that I have anybody who can commit to the sessions or would have fun playing, if that makes sense.
I think in regards to setting up a game, I think communication is key. That's probably the most cliche thing I could possibly say, especially as a communication studies major. But really, communication is key, as cliche as it is. Especially when you're starting a game out, you want to get the expectations of the players.
Oh, for sure.
You want to know what especially if they've never played D&D before. Ask them what do you think D&D is? A lot of them will say, oh, it's a video game, or oh, it's that thing they did on Stranger Things one time. They will all have different ideas of what it is. But I've found that normally I can't remember. I don't think I made this up. Maybe I did, but I don't think I did. I probably heard it somewhere. Players can be really funneled down into 3 categories, and the 3 categories fit into the RPG, role-playing game. So the first one is the R, role. Those are the players like me that want they want drama, they want role-playing, they want acting, they want improvisation, they want a real dramatic plot. They want to give rousing speeches. They want to improvise their way out of tough social situations. These are the players that really will commit to characters. They'll oftentimes have good accents. They will really, really want to play as their characters. And they'll really want to get serious about the game. So that's the first one, role. Then there's playing, role-playing game. So the P, the second one. These are the players who just want to have a good time. These are normally friend groups that have been together for ages. They just want to, have beers and hang out and chill, and just have a good, fun game night with their friends. These are the kind of players that just want to have a lot of inside jokes. They want to laugh a lot. They want to have a lot of table talk. They want to catch up with their friends, and it's a little less serious. So that's the second one. Then the third one, so RPG game. These are the players that are the number crunching math nerds. They treat it like a video game. They want to beat the game. Oftentimes the dungeon master is antagonistic, and is trying to defeat the players, and the players are treating this as a challenge they have to overcome by being the best players with the best attributes they can have. Oftentimes these are the players that have charisma as a dump stat. They don't care about the social interactions in the game or out of the game. They just want to treat it as a board game night where they are victorious. So those are kind of the 3. So there's the role players, there's the gamers, and then there's just like the players that just want to just relax and chill. So those 3, it'd be good to figure out what kind of game it is. You can absolutely incorporate all 3. But a lot of times the players are going to focus on one of them or 2 of them. Rarely are you going to have a player that is just all in on all of them. So I think when creating a game, when trying to get a table together, you want to figure out what they want. Are they role players? Are they just playful and want to mess around and have a good time with their friends? Or are they gamers who want to really, get into the game, min-max, and create the best characters they can to defeat kind of a board game, video game type game? You really want to figure out which one of the 3 they are, because that will save you a lot of time later. Because people have fun in different ways. Yeah. They don't have fun the same way.
That's really insightful. That I just got to sit and digest like everything you said, because I love the insight there. Would you say you'd rather have a group that's more of one of the 3, or would you rather have a mix?
I think it doesn't matter. I think as long as you communicate what it is. If you say to your players, like, yeah, this is going to be a gaming type role-playing game. I, as the DM, I'm trying to kill you. You're trying to beat me. There's not going to be much story. There's not going to be much messing around. That's what it is. Or if all the players are like, we just want to chill. We want to come over to your house. We want to drink beers. We want to hang out, laugh, have a bunch of inside jokes with crude humor. That's what we want instead. Then you alter the game for that. I think that's kind of the hard part about being a DM, because for me, I love, the first part, the R, the role playing, the role, like really getting to the drama. And if I were to have my way, we would be interacting deep scenes where we're like reciting weird Shakespearean rants at each other,
Oh my
and
God.
trying to make each other cry, and like really giving in-depth, sad, dramatic backstories. But I know players don't want that. Sometimes they're like, "Ah, it's finals week. I just want to drink a beer and have a silly NPC talk to me in a Russian accent." So basically, as the DM, you have to be flexible in what they want, and really, you just have to communicate what they want. Because it takes a dungeon master to create a game of D&D. It takes a game master to have a role-playing game take place at a table. So if you have a bunch of players that want to be hardcore gamers, and you just want to chill, that game might not work out. Yeah, so you really have to gauge the players and figure out what they want with really, really in-depth communication to figure out what their goals are for the game and figure out where they stand in kind of those three categories.
Mm-hmm. Expectations can cause a lot of conflict. If you have expectations for your group and the players have different expectations, there's going to be conflict because they're not getting what they want and you're not getting what you want. And because of that, there's going to be tension. There's going to be just unwanted conflict that is going to arise from you guys playing. So making sure everyone's on the same page to begin with is crucial to having more fun.
Absolutely.
My question is, I know a lot of our listeners are coming in because they have watched Critical Role. So having listened to or watched Critical Role, where would you say Matt Mercer and his group fall in the RPG, like role player and gamer?
Oh, I mean, it's so obviously in Role. I mean, it's in Critical Role.
Yeah.
I mean, they're voice actors, and you can tell they're great at what they do. They're masters of their craft, and you can just tell how well they stay in character. That they are role players. I mean, we've got people. I was just at Comic-Con this last week, and I mean, there's people cosplaying as Dungeons and Dragons characters. That just shows how much emphasis they put into their characters, and into their craft, into what they're creating for these wonderful dramatic moments. So it's obviously that, but you can also tell that they're friends. You can tell when Sam Riegel makes a joke that's a ridiculous pun that gets them laughing for 30 seconds and Matt Mercer's trying to get them back on track. That's obviously shows that they're, the play part, that they're all a group of friends. They've done this for years. But you can see that they largely neglect the game part of it.
I disagree.
Matt, I don't know.
I disagree as well.
I've seen Matt make critical fails more significant or less significant, to the point on the Dungeons and Dragons or Critical Role subreddits, people are freaking out about how Matt makes rule decisions. So I think largely they don't care as much about that. I mean, Matt Mercer has come on Reddit and said, I care about the story. The story comes first.
Sure.
I don't care about the math as much. And I think that's where they kind of side in those different categories.
Mm-hmm. I would say that they are more like game focused in combat because they use a battle map and they keep track of. It's less improv-y in terms of like rules in combat. They have very strict, they abide by 5e.
That's true. Yeah, Matt does stick to 5e, and I think honestly we're pointing at the creme de la creme. Matt Mercer's probably one of the best dungeon masters out there. So
for sure,
pointing at him, he probably balances those three, categories better than anyone that I've ever seen.
Oh, for sure. But why shouldn't we examine the most well-known, best, most skilled DM out there?
Well, then absolutely. He nails all three categories, I think, to the best balance that you can, because sometimes you have to neglect math to focus on the story. And sometimes you have to focus on fair combat and neglect some of the table talk, It's a hard balancing act, but those are the three, I think, categories. And he's a master of his craft, and he knows how to balance them best.
And I think this goes back to a really important point about getting the group right, because as you mentioned, Matt Mercer's group knows each other. They have personal relationships outside of the game. And unfortunately, I haven't experienced this, but I think a lot of our listeners have, playing at game stores with random people every week. I don't know how you would have that trust and that consistency and that quality of relationship without having your own private group.
Huh. Well, have you guys ever played with strangers?
Oh no, I wouldn't play with strangers.
Yeah,
I would
Like
be
I would go
curious
out
to
and
try.
meet them.
I would be curious. To
No,
try.
I am
I would
too.
try to meet them outside of the game and get to know them a little bit before.
Man, this is I want to try it because I haven't either. I've played with like acquaintances and people that I'm not friends with.
Yeah, same.
But I'd love to just go in blind to a game store and just be like, when's your next game, and just see what it's like, because that sounds
I think it'd be
incredible.
interesting.
Yeah, this would be a learning experience. In fact, I challenge both of you to go into a game store and
Okay.
run a game, like volunteer a game.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
yeah,
it's on my list.
definitely.
One last thing that I have to say is I'm so selective with who I even ask to play D&D or who I even tell that I play D&D. There's been people who I know and who I enjoy, but I won't ask them to play because I've seen them have short tempers and poor cooperation in groups. There was one friend of mine. We played Fishbowl, if you've ever played the game. It's also known as Monikers, if you want to buy like the official release. And we played it, I think, for a going away party once. And I saw this guy be a total immature baby about, in fact, dare I say, crybaby about losing the game because somebody said he didn't get a clue. And I'm so careful with my group selection because I find it to be just foundational to the enjoyment of the game.
I think for me, I will let anyone know I play D&D just to get the word out. I want as many people to know about D&D as possible, and know what it is. Like, it's not a video game, which is a common misconception.
So you're just a D&D evangelist.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm spreading the gospel. But for me, I've had the same players for so long that I can easily say, sorry, my table's full. I run at this point 2 weekly games.
Lucky.
So yeah, so I've got my hands full with my table. So it's very easy for me to say I don't have room right now, but absolutely look for games. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough to kind of shut people down like that, but also be evangelistic about D&D.
Has anyone ever asked you? Okay, I get this a lot. When people find out that I play D&D, they say, "Is that the game where you dress up like a wizard?"
Oh my gosh, what
and
is that
like multiple
from?
people. There's some
Just
kind of weird
LARPing?
misconception.
Yeah. LARPing.
Maybe. But then why do so many people know about LARPing, but nobody knows what actual Dungeons and Dragons
It
looks
seems like backwards.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is weird. But yeah, I get that too. It's like, oh, do you dress up for that? Or like they'll say, do I have to wear something?
Yep.
What?
Or do I have to talk in a funny voice?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you should,
Yes.
but you don't have to dress up.
Part of the game is communicating your expectations in terms of what is the world that you're going to be in, the tone of the game, even house rules that you may have. If you're tracking weight, for example, or maybe weapons have durability. I don't know. And then another part of expectations is how you expect the players to behave. If they have to cancel, they should try to let you know beforehand rather than last minute, 5 minutes before. Even if you're bringing snacks, if you want people to bring that, these are all things that you should try to communicate to the players clearly and just have them set as expectations beforehand so that they all know what they're getting into.
Oh yeah, I do this even with the people who I carefully select and have personal relationships with, because as a wise man once told me, you can't over communicate. Like, it seems like you are, but not everyone is on the same page.
Yeah.
So just make every effort to communicate, even if it's something like, hey, if you're uncomfortable in my game, just talk to me and you can make it clear. Don't just ghost me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've heard it, a wise man put it to be differently, but just saying redundant communication is so much better than a lack of communication. And so, yeah, confirming all these things, especially to players who've never played before. I think for us, we're kind of on the wave is really getting big of what Dungeons and Dragons is. We're starting to see mainstream shows. I mean, I'm thinking of Community, where they had 2 Dungeons and Dragons episodes. I'm thinking of like Big Bang Theory, where they talk about Dungeons and Dragons. These things are becoming more and more mainstream.
Oh yeah.
And because of that, people are starting to get more interested. And I think it's good to be able to explain to them what it is, how it works, Because if someone who's never heard of it or has ridiculous expectations, you could be like, all right, yeah, come and play D&D at my house, and they show up in, a wizard's garb with a wizard's hat and a wand, and they're speaking in a weird accent you've never heard. You'd be like, whoa, okay. I'd actually probably love that, but
Same.
Being able to communicate what all these things are. Especially, it gets awkward when you talk about cancellation notices, or just like kind of table behavior. Sometimes I'll be playing with groups, and there'll be one character that just makes obscene, ridiculous, dirty jokes. And you'll be like, okay, it's funny to make jokes like that for sure, but every other turn or every 10 seconds, and making it just absolutely disgusting that people are sickened by how they're talking, or even just like how food's gonna work, who's paying for pizza, stuff like that. Like you've missed 3 sessions in a row, do you really have the time to do this? That sort of thing I think falls on the dungeon master, because they are the one that is organizing the game. In their fictitious world, they kind of have to organize the game outside of that world too. They have to be responsible for table behavior, anyone who feels uncomfortable at the table, someone who keeps missing too many sessions, keeping track of who's paying for pizza, all that little stuff. I mean, most of the time that does fall on us, the dungeon masters.
I feel like a lot of problems that come from D&D, like socially speaking, are just a lack of confrontation.
Yeah.
Go to any D&D blog, especially feminist D&D blogs. There are people who are really mistreated at tables because nobody would stand up for them. Mistreatment is sadly a big part of the hobby, and a large part of that is just because nobody was willing to stand up and say, "Hey, stop doing that."
Yeah.
Take aside the problem player and talk to them. And I think it's a big problem, and it's as a DM, it's your responsibility to be willing to do that.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. So moving kind of away from group building and like interpersonal party conflict of real players, let's get in the group dynamics of characters themselves. So one of the big questions that a lot of people ask is about secret keeping. Who should you keep secrets from at the table? And how should secrets affect the story going forward, the narrative, and the interactions between characters? So the first question is, should players keep secrets from other players? What do you guys think?
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear this question is I played a very brief zombie one-shot kind of game. One of my players wanted to be a con man, but he wanted to keep that knowledge secret from the other players outside of the game and inside the game. Because he wanted it to be a kind of plot twist later on down the line.
Yeah.
But it was just a one-shot, and so that secret went nowhere. It was kind of a waste.
Oh, yeah.
It meant that he was kind of answering in ways that were confusing to the other players. And I don't know, it just didn't go the way we thought. So I think it would be more interesting for him to have told the players, but then their characters don't know, because then they could have played around it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about metagaming later, because that's a whole nother can of worms. But I mean, players from players, this is something I encourage wholeheartedly as a DM. I will oftentimes have campfire talk where, everyone will sit around a campfire. And instead of just skipping from, okay, you guys sleep for tonight. All right, everyone get your hit points back and your spell slots back. That was a long rest. All right, let's get up. Okay, where are you guys heading the next morning? No, I want them to sit around a campfire and like talk to each other. I want them to have banter. I want them to like interact. And so my players know, I'll just say, okay, banter. And they will start talking to each other. And so they know this happens a lot around campfires. And so I oftentimes encourage players to keep secrets from other players, especially when they're doing character creation, because then they can reveal those secrets over time to the other players. Ooh. And secrets don't necessarily have to be like, I'm a secret serial killer. They can be little things about like, my wife died. I don't tell anyone. Or just like big kind of character arc moments where they just, reveal things slowly about where they got to where they were, or who their old mentor was, or how they got that scar. I think player to player secrets are vital, and they, open up beautiful, beautiful role-playing elements that players can dive into and really interact with the secrets between each other.
Okay. All right. I might be convinced.
I agree.
Well, I guess it was a yes or no question.
That's true. So the next one is, should a dungeon master keep secrets from players?
Yes, that's the job description.
Yeah, I feel like this one's pretty easy. I think these secrets are, it's the name of the game. It's in the job description. Like, this is what dungeon masters do. They slowly reveal the plot over time.
The skill comes in when the DM needs to figure out how to reveal the secrets to players. That could be probably its own episode by itself.
Yeah.
Of how do you release information without either info dumping and just obliterating the players and their eyes glaze over and they don't pay attention. Or being so cagey and secretive that the players have no idea what you're talking about and just continue doing whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
Which I've been in both scenarios.
I think a lot of it involves timing of when to reveal certain things. Like a lot of times you'll have kind of a grand plot that you're following, whether it's a structured published adventure or it's your own homebrewed stuff. You have kind of a general plot, and it's the process of revealing big plot points and when to do it. Because if you kind of you just dump, you just have this bushel of plot points you just pour onto the table the first session, like you said, Will, like the player's eyes will glaze over and they'll forget half of them, probably more.
Yeah.
I think it's dungeon mastering is the art of revealing information at the right time.
Wow, I need to write that down. That's a very quotable soundbite.
I'm pretty sure that every time that someone has narrated me, like, the setting, I've just tuned out. Like,
it's hard, yeah.
It's not.
No, it's hard to not.
I'm not. It's not that it's just bad. It's just not interesting in the way that it's conveyed, because it's just like reading a Wikipedia page, and I'm not really a fan of doing that.
Yeah, and it's hard because as dungeon masters, I mean, I'm sure we talked about in our episode about world building. Like we said, we love these worlds. Like this is our baby that we made, and we want to show it off to the world. But like other people's children, there's a limit to how much other people want to see. And you have to, I think for me, like my main thing was just making a really cool map, making a really cool world. But in the first session being like, here's where you are and here's what's going on, but like not giving them the whole history of it.
I don't care about, the last 1,000 years of even just your kingdom. Like, I care about what's happening now.
Most people don't care about the last 1,000 years of this Earth's history.
True.
That's spoken like a true podcaster.
Most people don't care about the history of our world. So why in God's name would they care about the history of your made-up one?
Wow. And once again, very quotable.
Okay, so a DM obviously should keep secrets from players. Okay, here's the next one. Should players ever keep secrets from their dungeon master?
Well, I'm trying to think, like, what would you want to keep secret from a dungeon master? And there's honestly not a lot. Like, maybe you have some, like, OP, like, cheese move that you're going to do versus the boss coming up and you want to keep it secret. But, like, I can't really think of anything. Like, in general, it's best to be more open.
I cannot think of a scenario where a player knowing something that the GM doesn't would be good, right? Because I'm thinking that they pull out, I had a secret submachine gun, even though this is like D&D.
Yeah.
It's going to disappoint the player when they get vetoed. It's going to be frustrating to the GM when the player is just trying to like do their own thing. And I think it would indicate a deeper problem with the power dynamic in the game.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to hide things from a GM, then it's a symptom of larger problems that you have in your game.
That's a good point. I think for me, weirdly, with my weirdly specific table, I've got players that some of them know the player's handbook better than me. And so I am such a loose DM that I care more about the story and the plot and the table interactions than I do about the rules, or especially leveling up. I find leveling up so boring as a dungeon master, but like a lot of players, I mean, they live for that.
It feels good to level up. It does.
Yeah. And I guess since I haven't been a player for so long, I've been a dungeon master for years and years, I kind of forget how important and how good it feels to level up. So oftentimes the players, they know D&D so well that they level up themselves. And the only thing I do is roll for their health, where they'll pick mine or their dice depending on who rolled better. And that's all I do in regards to their leveling up because they know how to do it so well already. So a lot of times they'll get spells and they'll use them against, my boss. And I'll be like, what? You have that spell? They're like, yeah, I just got it. And and I trust them because obviously we've been friends long enough. They've played long enough. They're not going to lie to me. But they will surprise me with spells they've learned or with abilities they've gained that I, don't know the player's handbook well enough. So I guess that's the only time that players kind of surprise me as a DM.
Your group just never ceases to amaze me at how much of a unicorn it is.
It is not, it is rare. It's not a standard group. The last question revolving around secret keeping is secrets that aren't secrets. So this is kind of open knowledge. This is like table metagame knowledge. So what do you guys do to address metagaming at your table? And has it been a problem for you?
I think that the best way that I've seen it have been dealt with is through just directly like calling it out. So if a player is acting based off of another player's actions who's in a different location in game, if that makes sense, and and they act differently because of their character acts differently, I'd be like, you wouldn't know that because they're not there. And then I would kind of like nudge them because I don't think that there's it's just kind of breaking the immersion in the game. So you just kind of gotta call it out, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It actually hasn't been that big of a problem for me. I mean, there's always like, everybody splits up in town and somebody's talking to a shopkeeper and combat breaks out and then suddenly everybody just wants to go there for no reason. But then I'm not usually that strict on it because honestly, the way I run my game is I try to completely avoid town scenarios because I find most of the stuff happens when players don't have anything better to do. And I know that Jake runs a much more improv-heavy, story-focused game, and then I'm actually not sure what I would classify David's games as, but at least the way I imagine my games is a lot more focused, though not lately, as David will attest, because I'm experimenting with some different things, but whatever. I would just make sure that they don't have a chance to metagame, because they're here and now in the moment.
Yeah, it's been really interesting with my players, because like I said, they know the game of D&D so well that they know some of the stats for the monsters. They know what these things are good at, what their weaknesses are, soft spots in their armor, that sort of thing. Wow. So a way I think I creatively addressed this was one of my players who's very into the game itself actually bought Volo's Guide to Monsters and read through it. I actually don't own Volo's Guide, so I haven't actually read through it. So he had that, and he loves looking at monsters in the monster manual. So what I did was I offered his character the book Volo's Guide to Monsters in the game.
What?
And so he obviously wanted it so bad that he bought it. So he bought it, and then I said, okay, you're now allowed to look through Volo's Guide or the monster manual whenever you want to look at the stats of characters. And so I made him pay an arm and a leg for it. But it paid off because he kind of didn't have to stop himself from metagaming anymore. Because his character, he's playing like an intellectual paladin, kind of like a bookish half-orc paladin. So it makes sense for his character to be very intellectual. He's able to now tell his party, what the weakness of the monster is. Because he bought a very expensive book. And now it kind of allows him to metagame.
What a unique solution. I would have never thought of kind of incentivizing metagaming, but I really like that. You have to tell me how that ends up, because do you feel like it's harmed your campaign at all?
Not necessarily, because a lot of the monsters I'm introducing, I'm still running on Chult, so they're encountering some weird monsters that aren't in Volo's Guide, which is great. But no, I feel like my characters are also pretty disciplined enough to not metagame for the most part. Because they realize they want to have a fun time, and if they said, "Oh, we got to aim for its red dot on its head," it's kind of they know it.
Red dot on the head goblin.
It would make it less fun for them. We talk about our players metagaming all the time, but there's actually an underdiagnosed problem about Dungeon Master metagaming. And I can't remember where I heard this. It might have been WebDM or some other Dungeon Master YouTube channel. But they were talking about Dungeon Master metagaming, where you as the Dungeon Master will try to do the most intelligent thing when you strike a party, even though the monster may not know that. So, if you're playing as a Hydra, you might make all of your heads attack the cleric, because the cleric is the healer of the party, and you want to try to make this challenging and cut off the heals, even though the Hydra, might not have the highest intelligence, wouldn't know to attack the cleric instead of the paladin.
I heard a really interesting solution for the metagaming DM from a channel called Runehammer on YouTube. He used to be called Drunkens and Dragons, but he's rebranded lately. His solution is what he calls the dice mind. And what he does for each of his monsters is he makes a table, like a d6 table, that has what a monster might do when it attacks. And so it's essentially random. So he has either a random table or he has a flow chart that's like if-then. Like if I'm at below 50 health, I do this. And this is just to make sure that he is not responsible for the decisions of the monster. So if you get into a situation where a Hydra goes and like either always attacks the back, right? He attacks casters, which they wouldn't necessarily do, or it always attacks the person in front, which is not necessarily interesting, right? Just to make it a little more dynamic. And I thought that was a really unique approach because it kind of creates this insulating layer between the, let's say, the outrage of the players at the DM for being, what's a nice way to say it? For being unkind.
Yeah, I know. I can tend to do that sometimes where I know what the party is going to do, so I do things to counter it, like proactively when in game, if the NPCs were acting on just the normal information and not based on the metagame information, they would do something completely different. I think the importance of not metagaming makes the game more lively and realistic, because if enemies are acting based off of how they would normally act, it just creates a much more immersive environment for the players to be in, and it's much more roleplay and story focused.
Yeah. It feels more real. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about managing the spotlight, because some players are attention hogs.
Yep.
Or even just more assertive, and some players are more timid. What's the solution here?
Well, one of the things that I like to do is try to bring more of the timid players into the spotlight. So, depending upon the character's race or class, you could have specific NPCs that are more willing to talk to them, or maybe they speak that specific language. So they're forced to be the one interacting. So it's not necessarily... It kind of helps shift the spotlight. Personally, I haven't encountered too many people who are just so much of an attention hog that like nobody else gets to talk at all. Usually my parties have been pretty balanced and everyone is kind of doing something.
A long time ago, when I first started playing D&D, which actually wasn't D&D, I played a game called Savage Worlds, but that's neither here nor there. Some of the advice that I read was that each session of the game had a main character, and that main character was one of the players, and it changed every week. That way everybody has a chance, like literally a whole mission where they're the main thing, and so you delve into their backstory and whatever. The only time I've seen this go badly was one week I had it all planned out, and the player whose week it was didn't want to play. He said he was sick, but he wasn't.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and he completely refused to play. And I was like, but you don't understand, the entire adventure
hinges
is built
on you.
around your character.
Oh.
And he said no. And I'm like, well, and that was actually the last time I played with that person.
Man, despite the tragedy of that situation, I feel like that totally makes sense with my campaigns. Basically, I have an overarching story that they will do. Normally it's, the rise of Tiamat, or it's, going through the Tomb of Annihilation on Chult. But then I will also encourage my players, whenever they're doing character creations, to make their own personal arc. And you can kind of look at the traits, bonds, flaws all that stuff, and really you can kind of make an arc. Like you can be like, okay, my arc is obviously redemption. My arc is obviously to find my family. My personal character arc is to kill this one bad guy. And so each character will have their own personal arc, and then there'll be the overarching story. And yeah, you'll kind of take turns from week to week, and sometimes you'll do a big quest line point, but then you'll also kind of veer off and do a personal quest that the group agrees is worth it. So yeah, it's kind of finding that balance between the main and the personal, and managing that spotlight of the characters. I think another example of this is the current season of Critical Role with Matt Mercer. He'll tell everyone to leave the room except one character, and he will do a personal, 15-minute session with them, where they're either addressed by an authority figure, or the patron of a warlock shows up, and it's a very personal thing. And then the rest of the party shows back up, and it's super great because all the party is thinking like, okay, what's happening with that personal arc? And they leave it up to the character who is interacting with the DM to let them know how much of what happened. So I think it's really important to focus on specific characters every once in a while.
That's really cool.
I need to watch season 2.
It's great. It's so good.
I think that one of the other ways that you can kind of help spread the spotlight is trying to get the players to interact with each other. So if you have a group that isn't necessarily friends with each other, it might be hard because players are acting on their own and they don't consider themselves a group. So getting the players to interact in-game with each other could be a good way of just getting more people to interact. So you kind of prompt characters to talk to each other.
Oh, absolutely. I think a way to spur this on, even during character creation, is there's a game called Fiasco, which is incredible. It's like a long form improv, 2-act Coen Brothers play. It is it is such a blast. Where everything goes wrong in the second act, and you have your personal character, and you start sitting around a table, and you have a personal relationship with the person to your left and the person to your right. And so you could be brother and sister with the person to your left, and you could be the mentor of the person on your right. And each character has a bond with two of the other characters in the party. And it makes it so much better because a lot of times it's hard to, mash characters together and just say, oh, you all meet in a tavern and you're going to go kill this beast because that was on the wanted poster. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for those characters to care about each other. But if you give them bonds, that's a really, really good way to make the other characters care about each other, and putting the spotlight on each of those bonds as the plot demands.
Have you ever assigned Fiasco relationships in D&D?
I have, yeah. In fact, I encourage it. I don't necessarily bring out the Fiasco rules. The way the Fiasco does it is you draw an arrow to your left and right, and then you write on the arrow what the relationship is, which is super cool. But no, I will just kind of say, you guys, you have to know the character to your left and right somehow, and that easily makes the party more connected. They could be an old friend, they could be, and they could even be old enemies.
Yeah, rivals.
Rivals. And that adds a whole nother element that makes the party kind of sometimes antagonistic to each other, but it builds the character of the party to make it more interesting than just 4 random adventurers joined together to do some random quest and care about each other for some reason. It gives a specific reason for each of them to care about each other. And because of those relationships, you can shine a spotlight on them to address certain inter-party conflicts that are running alongside the main campaign.
I love it. This week's Vault question is, if you could be the dungeon master for any group of people, living or dead, who would be at your table?
There's so many people who I want to play with.
There's so many, yeah. Like a lot of times I will see someone, whether they're acting in a TV show or they're just on, a late night comedy show. I'll see them and be like, oh, I would love to be the dungeon master for him, or be like, oh, she would be great playing D&D. So that's tough. An obvious answer that comes to mind is Robin Williams.
Oh yeah,
Robin Williams.
He was one of
I feel like he'd be great. I feel like he'd, with his accents. I mean, I feel like he'd be a great dungeon master.
That's true.
But I feel like he would be amazing in D&D.
You're probably right.
Yeah, I would want. Let's see, Bob Ross. I think he would be a great player.
What? Bob Ross, David.
I think he would be like a really cool bard, or just some sort of like creative like type player. He's very positive and optimistic. Your lawful good type.
I'm just hearing in my mind Bob Ross say, "I slit the goblin's throat," and it's making me. I can't handle it. It's making my brain break.
Some other people that I would like to play with, maybe like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Oh yeah,
he's so charismatic. He's so.
I feel like he's playing
so
D&D
cool.
in most of the roles he plays. Like,
Pretty
it's
much,
kind of over the top absurdity. I think another one for me. Okay, the cast of Whose Line Is It Anyway? I feel like would be. I mean, the nature of D&D is improvisation, especially the game that I like to DM for is all role playing improvisation, and ridiculous characters. I feel like the cast of Whose Line Is It Anyway, or just really any good improv troupe in general, would be my optimal table to DM for.
Another one would be Dan Harmon.
Yeah, he's so just ridiculous. I mean, Harmon Quest is essentially that, and he is ridiculous in that with his absurd daddy issues, and it is so funny.
Wow. Well, David took my idea for Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I want The Rock. I want Justin Timberlake. I want Jimmy Fallon.
Andy Samberg.
Jimmy Fallon would laugh the whole time.
What's wrong with that? They're just called D&D. I laugh the whole time. Andy Samberg would be freaking hilarious. So this question has actually got me thinking, like, not just a person. Oh, actually, Emma Stone I would pick just so I'd have an excuse to be in the same room with her. No, so this got me thinking, like, you could pick just a cast of a show or a movie. For instance, like, the entire cast of the new Jumanji film would probably be pretty darn funny.
That movie felt like D&D for the most part.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Or you could have, like, the actual Stranger Things kids.
Or,
like, they're hilarious.
People in Guardians of the Galaxy, just, like, playing their characters.
Oh, my gosh.
Again, that movie feels like D&D as well.
I feel like just a lot of movies these days are basically D&D.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why D&D is doing so well. I think, thinking historically, even, I'm trying to think, like, Aristotle, like, what his character would be like. How, absurd and how much he'd probably ask a lot of questions. But like
he would be obnoxious.
Or like Tolkien, or even some of the OG.
Dude, I don't know. Tolkien would build the world for me, and I'd be like, Tolkien, stop! This is mine.
I wouldn't play with Tolkien.
He'd speak in Elvish. He'd speak in Elvish the whole time.
Like, he comes to the table with 60 pages of character backstory. I'm like, come on, John, get your life together.
Okay. The same thing could go for William Shakespeare. Like, you think he would be good, or would he come with like too much? He'd probably have like 8 different characters, and he couldn't decide which one to play.
Oh no!
I feel like there'd be a kind of a language barrier, just because.
I mean, let's assume for the question's sake
there'd be one between Aristotle and me as well.
Yeah, I gotta play in Greek, huh?
Well, dude, Charlie Chaplin, I feel like would be a great D&D player. Like, just even though most of his movies were for the most part silent films, like just his emotion, like just the way he emotes, the way he portrays a character, I feel like he could play like an amazing bard. Like I would love to see that.
Thanks for listening to Vox Arcana, episode 6. I'm William.
I'm Jake.
I'm David.
We'll see you next time. If you have any questions or you just want to give us some feedback, you can email us at voxarcanapodcast@gmail.com. or you can find our site online at voxarcanapodcast.blogspot.com. We're on every social media network, even Tinder, so swipe right for Vox Arcana.